I never imagined I'd have a story worth sharing, but the past few weeks have been surreal. It all started with something so minor, a woman taking photos of my late grandfather's workshop from the street. At first, I didn't think much of it. People often admired the old building, a classic barn-style structure with charm that only decades of craftsmanship could give. But then, I noticed her coming back every day, snapping more pictures and making notes. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of an intense battle that would take twists and turns I could never have expected. My grandfather passed away 2 months ago. He was the kind of man who could fix anything, build everything, and somehow remember everyone's name and birthday in the neighborhood. His workshop, which now belongs to me, was his pride and joy. It's where he spent countless hours tinkering, repairing, and teaching me everything I know about tools. Every shelf, every pegboard, and every workbench holds a memory of our time together. Lessons passed down from one generation to the next. The house, now mine, has been in the family for over 45 years. The workshop sits on a quarter-acre of land behind it, surrounded by lush greenery and a small gravel path. There's never been any question about the ownership of this property. Or so I thought, until Karen entered the picture. Last Thursday, I was cleaning out some of my grandfather's old projects in the workshop when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned to find the photo-taking woman standing there. She was wearing a blazer despite the summer heat, holding a leather portfolio as if she was about to close a business deal. Her presence alone felt oddly confrontational. "I'm Karen, the HOA president," she said without waiting for me to reply. "We need to discuss the property situation." I must have looked confused because she immediately launched into a rehearsed-sounding speech. According to Karen, the workshop and the land it sat on had always belonged to the HOA. My grandfather had apparently been allowed to use it as a courtesy, but now that he had passed, the property naturally reverted to the HOA. "We'll need it cleared out by the end of the month," she said, inspecting her manicured nails as though this was already decided. I tried to explain that I had inherited the property, workshop and all, and that the deed clearly marked the land as mine. Karen didn't even blink. "Oh, honey," she said condescendingly, pulling out some documents from her portfolio. "These are the original property agreements from the 1980s. Your documents must be outdated." Something about the papers she waved at me felt off. The letterhead looked too new for 40-year-old documents, and the signatures seemed oddly perfect, as if they'd been traced. Before I could take a closer look, she yanked them back and offered a smug smile. That night, I dug through my grandfather's meticulous files. The man never threw anything away. Among receipts from 1975 and manuals for tools that no longer exist, I found every document related to the property, the original deed, building permits, and even photos from when the workshop was built. All of it confirmed that the workshop land was part of the property, no question about it. I even found handwritten notes from my grandfather about the property's boundaries, complete with sketches. The next morning, I called the county records office to request the official records. While waiting for them to dig everything up, I decided to talk to some neighbors. That's when the real story started to unfold, and my resolve to fight Karen only grew stronger. Mrs. Valentina, who has lived next door for 30 years, got a sour look on her face when I mentioned Karen's claim. Apparently, Karen had a history of pulling stunts like this. 3 elderly residents had sold their homes below market value after mysterious HOA violations started piling up. Valentina warned me to be careful. "She preys on people who don't know their rights," she told me, her voice filled with frustration. Later that day, Karen showed up again, this time with an official-looking notice. "You'll be fined $8,000 per day if the workshop isn't vacated by the end of the month," she said breezily, as though commenting on the weather. When I mentioned the deed and documentation I had, she laughed. "Those won't hold up," she said, turning to leave. But before she did, she added, "Oh, and by the way, we've been looking into the main house, too. There seem to be quite a few violations your grandfather let slide. It would be a shame if we had to address those as well." The workshop wasn't just a building to me. It was a piece of my grandfather's legacy, filled with memories and lessons. Every pegboard with tools outlined in marker, every note he left in his careful handwriting, it was all irreplaceable. I wasn't about to let Karen take that away. I installed security cameras after catching Karen snooping around the property for the fourth time that week, measuring and taking pictures. Meanwhile, the county records office confirmed that the workshop was part of my property. But the real breakthrough came when I managed to track down Oliver, my grandfather's old friend. Oliver had seen my grandfather's obituary and had been meaning to reach out. When I told him about the situation, he immediately said, "Don't say another word. You need to come over here. There's something you need to see." When I arrived at Oliver's house, I found him surrounded by old photo albums and file boxes. He hadn't just helped build the workshop, he had documented everything about it. "Your grandfather and I knew something like this might happen again," Oliver said, pulling out a manila envelope. "That's why we kept everything." It turns out the HOA had tried the same stunt back in 1987. Oliver had all the proof: original survey maps, building permits, photos of property markers, and, most importantly, a notarized letter from the 1987 HOA board acknowledging that the workshop land belonged to my grandfather. Oliver also shared photos of the construction process, showing the workshop being built step by step. The property markers in the photos matched the current ones exactly, the very markers Karen claimed were wrong. Armed with this treasure trove of evidence, I met with my lawyer, who was thrilled. "They can't claim the land was always HOA property when we have proof they tried and failed to claim it years ago," she said. At the next HOA meeting, Karen tried to shut me down, but a longtime resident named Noah stood up and called her out. "Those documents are fake," he said flatly. "I was on the board in the 80s, and that's not what our letterhead looked like." The meeting erupted. Other residents shared their own horror stories about Karen's harassment. One neighbor, Cora, who works for the city planning office, revealed that Karen had been inquiring about rezoning my property for commercial use. It all started to make sense: the measuring, the photos, the mysterious men in suits. Karen had been planning something bigger than just stealing a workshop. Karen's downfall began when my security cameras caught her trespassing on my property late at night with two men measuring and eyeing my workshop. Armed with undeniable evidence, my lawyer confirmed we had a rock-solid harassment case. At a dramatic emergency HOA meeting, Karen's web of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement was exposed, resulting in her immediate removal as president and a district attorney investigation. The workshop is now officially mine, with clear boundaries set to end any future disputes. The new HOA board, bowing to community outrage, implemented strict transparency rules, including mandatory multi-member approval for property claims. As for Karen, she's packing up and moving, fittingly, to a neighborhood without an HOA. If you've been following my last story about Karen trying to steal my grandfather's workshop, you won't believe what happened next. This time, the chaos didn't unfold in my neighborhood, but in a nearby community where my co-worker and good friend Sam owns a small bakery. It seems like the Karen curse is alive and well, because his HOA president, another Karen of course, decided to launch an all-out attack on humankind. And somehow, I found myself dragged into the madness. Sam's bakery isn't just any bakery. It's a cozy little corner shop where locals gather for fresh bread, warm pastries, and a sense of community. Sam poured his heart and soul into the place, transforming an old brick building into the vibrant bakery it is today. Everyone in the neighborhood loves it, except for Karen, and that's where the trouble begins. It all started when Sam called me in a panic one evening. Karen, the HOA president in his area, had sent him a letter claiming that the bakery's signage violated community aesthetic standards. According to her, the cheerful sign that read "Sam's Breads and Beyond" was too large and disruptive to the neighborhood's uniform appearance. Mind you, the sign was a modest wooden design, hand-painted by a local artist, and perfectly matched the charm of the bakery. Sam tried to reason with her, explaining that the sign had been up for years without issue, but Karen wasn't having it. She issued a warning. If you don't remove the sign within 10 days, the HOA will take action to ensure compliance. That's when Sam brought me in. "You've dealt with a Karen before," he said, half joking, half desperate. "I need your help." And how could I say no? If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you don't let a Karen bully you into submission. We started digging. After flipping through the HOA bylaws and consulting with a few neighbors, it became clear that Karen's complaint about the sign was just a smokescreen. The real issue? Karen had plans to open her own trendy cafe 2 streets over, and she saw Sam's Bakery as competition. One of the neighbors even overheard Karen bragging about how she'd clean up the area and make it more upscale. The audacity was unreal. Sam's Bakery wasn't just a business, it was a part of the community. He'd donate leftover bread to local shelters, host free baking workshops for kids, and sponsor local events. Karen's actions weren't just an attack on him, they were an attack on everything his bakery stood for. Things escalated quickly. Karen began sending daily notices, each one more ridiculous than the last. One claimed the bakery's outdoor seating area violated HOA regulations because the chairs weren't neutral colored. Another alleged that the smell of fresh bread was a nuisance to the neighborhood. Yes, you read that right. She complained about the smell of bread. Karen didn't stop there. She started snooping around the bakery during the day, walking around and jotting down notes as if she were preparing for a court case. Several neighbors reported seeing her peering through the windows, trying to get a better look inside. Sam even caught her taking pictures of the delivery trucks parked outside. It was clear she was building some kind of bizarre case against the bakery. By this point, Sam was at his wit's end. I suggested installing security cameras around the bakery. And it's a good thing we did, because what happened next was straight out of a movie. One night, the cameras caught Karen sneaking around the bakery after hours. She was accompanied by 2 men carrying tools. They began measuring the sign and marking areas on the pavement around the outdoor seating. It was clear they were planning something, but we didn't know what. The next morning, Sam found an urgent notice taped to the bakery's door. According to the letter, the HOA had approved the removal of the sign and planned to have contractors dismantle it within 48 hours. They even threatened to charge Sam for the cost of removal. Enough was enough. We took the footage to the police, along with all the bogus notices Karen had been sending. The officers were surprisingly helpful. They advised us to file for a temporary injunction against the HOA, preventing them from taking any action until the matter could be reviewed in court. The following day, Karen showed up with a contractor and a clipboard, ready to remove the sign. But this time, we were ready. Sam and I stood outside the bakery with a small crowd of neighbors who had come to show their support. Some of them held handmade signs that read, "Save our bakery," and "We stand with Sam." When Karen saw the cameras and the police officer we'd called to monitor the situation, she turned bright red. "This is an HOA matter," she snapped, waving her clipboard. "You have no authority here." The officer calmly asked to see her permits and documentation. Karen stammered something about verbal approvals and community interests, but she couldn't produce a single valid document. When the officer mentioned the footage of her trespassing, Karen's smug attitude vanished. She quickly ordered the contractor to leave and stormed off, muttering about how we'd regret this. Karen's antics finally caught up with her when the HOA board, unaware of her schemes, apologized to Sam and vowed to revise the bylaws. Her cafe plans crumbled as investors pulled out, leaving her credibility in shreds. Meanwhile, Sam's Bakery thrived, with the community rallying behind him and Karen's crumble becoming a cheeky new menu hit. Karen's reign as HOA president is over, and neighbors are now swapping tales of her petty power plays. From garden gnome fines to parking threats, her past is under scrutiny. This saga proves that documentation, community support, and standing your ground can triumph over any bully. After the chaos with Karen at my grandfather's workshop and the drama at Sam's Bakery, you'd think I'd have seen the last of HOA battles. But life has a way of proving otherwise. This time, the battle wasn't mine, at least not directly. It was my sister-in-law, Mia, who found herself up against an HOA Karen in Alabama. And of course, I ended up right in the thick of it. If you've ever dealt with a Karen, you know they don't just want power, they want control. This one? She was no exception. Mia's farm is her pride and joy. Nestled in the rolling hills of Alabama, it's a picturesque slice of heaven with a sprawling vegetable garden, a small orchard, and a few chickens roaming freely. Mia pours her heart into the farm, growing organic produce and selling it at local farmers markets. The farm's charm and sustainability have made it a beloved staple in the community. It's not just a business for Mia, it's her life's work, a sanctuary she built with her own hands. But not everyone appreciates its rustic appeal. Enter Karen, the president of the local HOA. Despite Mia's farm being located on private property outside the main neighborhood, Karen seemed to think the entire area was her domain. The trouble started when Mia installed a handmade wooden sign at the entrance of her driveway that read, "Welcome to Greenhaven Farm." It was simple, warm, and inviting, but Karen saw it as a declaration of war. Karen showed up unannounced one sunny afternoon, clipboard in hand and a scowl on her face. "We need to talk about the sign," she said, skipping pleasantries altogether. According to Karen, the sign violated some vague HOA regulation about unapproved roadside fixtures. Mia, confused, politely explained that the farm wasn't part of the HOA and that the sign was on her private property. Karen's response? "Oh, honey, everything around here falls under our jurisdiction. It's for the good of the community." That was just the beginning. Over the next week, Karen started showing up more frequently, pointing out violations Mia didn't even know existed. The chickens, a noise nuisance. The vegetable garden, improper land use. And the fruit trees, a potential hazard during storms. Each visit left Mia more frustrated, and by the end of the week, Karen had escalated to her most bizarre complaint yet. "The vegetables you're growing smell too strong." At first, we couldn't figure out why Karen was so determined to make Mia's life miserable. But then, during one of her visits, she let something slip. While inspecting the garden, again uninvited, Karen offhandedly mentioned her precious Rufus, her dog, who apparently had dietary restrictions requiring fresh vegetables. Mia and I exchanged a look. Could it be? Was Karen harassing Mia to get access to her produce for her dog? The theory sounded ridiculous, but the more we thought about it, the more it made sense. Karen had been eyeing the vegetable garden since her first visit. On her next trip, she outright asked Mia if she'd be willing to donate some of her harvest to the community. Read Rufus. When Mia politely declined, explaining that the produce was her livelihood, Karen's tone shifted dramatically. "Well, if you're not willing to cooperate," Karen said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, "then we might have to revisit those violations." True to her word, Karen ramped up her efforts. Within days, Mia started receiving notices from the HOA, despite not being a member. They claimed her farm was negatively impacting property values and demanded she remove the sign, reduce the size of her garden, and relocate her chicken coop. It was absurd. Karen's petty antics didn't stop there. One evening, Mia found a flyer circulating in the neighborhood, warning residents about the unregulated activities happening at Greenhaven Farm. The flyer included exaggerated claims about noisy animals, eyesore structures, and suspicious visitors, a thinly veiled jab at Mia's farmers market customers. Then came the incident that took things to a whole new level. One morning, Mia woke up to find Karen and two men standing in her driveway with a tape measure. They were marking out sections of her property and writing things down. When Mia confronted them, Karen had the audacity to claim they were assessing community improvements. Mia called me immediately. By the time I arrived, Karen and her crew had moved on, but the frustration and stress were written all over Mia's face. That's when I decided enough was enough. Instead of relying on cameras, I suggested we hire a private investigator, PI, to monitor Karen's actions. The PI we hired was thorough. Over the next 2 weeks, he documented Karen's activities around the neighborhood. She was seen walking into other people's yards, measuring fences, and even taking pictures of properties that had nothing to do with the HOA. When it came to Mia's farm, the PI caught Karen on several occasions, lingering near the garden, jotting notes and having heated conversations with the same two men from before. The most damning evidence came when the PI recorded Karen bragging to someone at a local cafe about how she planned to scare Mia into compliance. "People like her don't belong here," Karen said. "I'll make her regret putting up a fight." That was all the confirmation we needed. The final straw came a week later. Mia caught Karen in the vegetable garden picking tomatoes. When confronted, Karen didn't even try to deny it. "I'm just helping myself," she said, as if that made it okay. "You have plenty to spare, and Rufus needs his vitamins." Mia was furious. She told Karen to leave immediately, but Karen refused, claiming she had every right to be there. That's when Mia called the police. When the officers arrived, Karen's lies fell apart thanks to the PI's recordings showing her trespassing, stealing vegetables, and intimidating Mia. The community quickly rallied around Mia, flooding her farm with support, purchases, and even a local news article that gained viral attention online. Karen was ousted as HOA president after an emergency meeting, and the board officially apologized to Mia, confirming her farm was beyond HOA control. With Karen retreating into the background, Greenhaven Farm now thrives, proving that persistence and community spirit can overcome even the worst Karen antics.